This is the Dollemore Daily.
Hi, I'm Mike Greiner from the Democratic Activist Channel. I'm just sitting in for Jesse while he's moving from California to D.C. so he can better cover national politics. Now, I wish Jesse the best of luck in his move. Moving is not something I want to engage in anytime soon, so hopefully everything's going smoothly for him. In the meantime, let's continue talking about politics here. And one item of news that jumped out at me was the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene, our favorite congressperson from QAnon, argued that the United States should engage in a national divorce in which we separate the red states from the blue states. And one of the arguments that she made is that people moving from a Democratic state to a Republican state should not be allowed to vote there. So much for one person, one vote, right? What's more is this whole proposal seems to remind me of a time when the United States did kind of go through a national divorce. And we fought a very bloody war to stop it, as I recall. And the basis for that very bloody divorce was, wait for it, racism. Kind of the same thing that's driving the division that we have right now, isn't it? Now, I do find Marjorie Taylor Greene's idea somewhat counterproductive for a couple of reasons. For starters, I do find her proposal somewhat ironic. I mean, consider a couple of these facts. For example, a study by the Rockefeller Institute of Government found that blue states pay significantly more in taxes than red states. And what's more, red states get significantly more in money from the federal government than blue states. So, for example, over the past 5 years, New York, which is definitely a blue state, New York taxpayers have given $142.6 billion more to the federal government than New York residents have received back in federal spending. In fact, the top four losers in terms of giving more to the federal government than they're getting back are Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey, all blue states. And what's the biggest winner in terms of receiving more in federal spending and benefits than it pays in federal taxes? Well, that would be Kentucky, the home state of libertarian Rand Paul, who doesn't believe in any government spending, allegedly, except, of course, when his state needs emergency aid, and our good friend, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. It gives the idea of no taxation without representation new meaning, doesn't it? So on the one hand, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene claiming that we need to separate the blue states from the red states. But what would the red states do to make up the lost revenues they get from all that money pouring from the blue states to them? It's not terribly surprising, by the way, that the blue states pay more in taxes. The blue states tend to be more well-educated, have better educational systems, better universities, and in general, better health than the red states. In fact, the American Human Development Index, which looks at a state-by-state analysis of critical factors like income, education, and health, showed that the AHDI for red states was much lower than the AHDI for blue states. And in fact, if you wanted to kind of compare it to other countries, the blue states have an AHDI that's comparable to that of the Netherlands, a pretty progressive country, for sure. The red states, well, they resemble that of Russia. So maybe it's not that surprising that the Republicans are so enamored with Vladimir Putin. What's more, if you compare the growth in gross domestic product between the blue states and the red states, since the recession ended in 2009, the average disparity in GDP growth between red states and blue states has hovered around 3.5%. Now that may not sound like much, but to give you an idea, in the 1990s, when we had such incredible economic growth, that was around 3.5% per year. And the growth that Donald Trump was arguing was the best economy in the history of the country was around 3%. And what's more is if you compare this number to the convergence among the top 20 developed countries, it found a GDP convergence of them of only 1.75%. So we're double that. So in effect, you have the blue states that are a very well-educated, economically successful country compared with the red states that are basically a third world nation. And really the only things that have been sustaining the red states at this point are spending from the federal government, basically paid for primarily by the blue states, of course, and by our capital markets, which rely upon the fact that you've got uniform sets of laws across the United States to spread investment funds in parts of the country that might not have received it otherwise. But this is really only the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I mean, Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene's home state, who I assume she believes should go with the red states, is now represented by, wait for it, 2 Democratic U.S. senators. And in fact, over the past number of years, the state has been trending more and more Democratic. I would not be surprised if we see in the next election, by the way, Stacey Abrams being elected governor. So maybe in this national divorce then, Georgia, much to Marjorie Taylor Greene's consternation, should go with the, wait for it, blue states. And the final thing that jumps out at me is, what about all the Democrats living in the red states? Don't we, owe them something too? I mean, Wyoming is the most Republican state in the country, and yet 73,491 people voted for President Biden. And then we have Texas, of course, which is the poster child for Republicans. Although it'll be interesting to see if Beto O'Rourke is elected governor in the next election. Could happen. In that state, 5,259,126 people voted for President Biden. That was 46.48% of the vote. Now, if we take that percentage of the entire population of Texas, that means that 13.5 million Texans are Democrat. Are we going to doom those people to living in the third world countries that the red states represent? Or should we give them the benefits of a future that are really what the blue states represent? Well, I guess as usual, this just shows that Marjorie Taylor Greene is completely full of crap, which should come as no surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to her. But I can tell you that my wife, a lifelong Democrat, certainly looks at those red states and is like, why are we working so hard to try to protect them when all they do is want to crap all over us? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole situation, and you could leave them down below. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video, and if you could check out my channel, Democratic Activist, we'll post a link to that down below, and let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.